I woke up choking on smoke that wasn't there. My heart thudded against my ribs like it was trying to punch its way out, and my sheets were twisted around me, soaked through with sweat. The air was freezing, but my body burned like I'd been in a fire. Again, that dream had returned. No, that memory. It always started the same: red skies, ashes falling like snow, and the sound of wet, ragged breathing behind me. I'd run through the compound, past the burning chapel, over the writhing bodies of those who didn't make it. And just before I reached the gates, he would be there, standing at the edge of the flames, calm, smiling. Alfonso Creed, the prophet of the crimson light. He'd tilt his head, reach out his hand, and say, "You can't leave, Mike. You never did." And I'd wake up screaming. I sat up and rubbed my eyes until I saw colors. My cabin was dead quiet, just the low hum of the fridge and the distant rustle of wind in the trees. I grabbed the whiskey bottle on the nightstand, only to remember it was empty 2 days ago. My hands were still shaking. I stumbled into the bathroom, turned on the tap, and splashed cold water on my face. The mirror was fogged from my breath. I wiped it with the back of my arm, and for half a second, just a flicker, I thought I saw his face over my shoulder. But when I turned, there was nothing. Only the dark. The worst part about surviving something like that: people think the nightmare ends when the blood stops, when the fires burn out. But for me, the massacre never ended. It followed me, through cities, through bottles, through sleepless nights, and it brought me right back here, to Black Hollow. 20 years ago, I infiltrated the cult under the pretense of doing a story for Denver Daily. I was supposed to expose them, shine a light on the freaks hiding in the woods preaching salvation through flame and sacrifice. But I never got to write that article, because on the third night of the Festival of Crossing, they locked the gates, lit the fires, and made sure nobody would ever leave. Except me. I was the only one who walked away. But I didn't come back for redemption. I didn't come back for truth either. I came back because the dreams told me to. I leaned out the front door to get some air, letting the mountain cold slap me awake. Pines stretched endlessly into the distance, black and whispering in the early morning dark. My truck sat parked in the dirt, rusting in place like it had been waiting for something. I turned to go back inside, and froze. There, on the pine tree closest to my cabin, was a fresh carving. A symbol. 2 crescent moons back to back, a jagged line running through the center like a cracked eye. The mark of the crimson light. It hadn't been there yesterday. My mouth went dry. I took a step closer, brushing snow off the bark. The cuts were fresh, deep, clean. Someone had made this last night. Someone who knew the symbol. Someone who wanted me to see it. That's when I heard it. The whisper. Barely audible. Low. Rustling like wind through dry grass. "You're already dreaming, Mike." I spun around, eyes wide. But the woods were silent. No footsteps. No breath. No one. Just the cold and the mark on the tree, and the knowledge burning deep in my gut like a brand. The prophet was dead, but something of him still lingered, and it had found me again. I've learned to live with silence. It hums in the walls of my cabin, settles in the spaces between my thoughts, and fills the gaps where laughter used to live. It's been 8 years since the fire, since the screaming, since the night the sky bled red over Black Hollow. Most days, I pretend it's over. But some scars never close, they just scab over with denial. This morning, the silence felt heavier. The kind that presses down on your chest before you even roll out of bed. I made coffee with hands that still trembled from the dream, the taste like burnt earth on my tongue. Outside, fog hugged the treetops like old ghosts. The air smelled like wet pine and decay. I stood on my porch, staring down at the old dirt road leading back into town, wondering why I ever came back here. But I know why. It's guilt. Not survivor's guilt, not really. It's something worse. I chose to be there. Back in 1997, I was a journalist. Ambitious, young, and full of that toxic curiosity that makes you think you're invincible. When whispers of a strange called up in Black Hollow reached the city, I pitched the story to my editor. He said no. Too dangerous. Too messy. So I went alone. I pretended to be a drifter, told the crimson light I was searching for answers, for meaning. They welcomed me like family. Alfonso Creed himself placed his hand on my shoulder and said, "The lost are always welcome in the light." He had a way of speaking that made everything sound beautiful, even when it wasn't. The compound sat deep in the woods, past the logging trail that had been shut down years before. The cabins were simple, wood, stone, lots of symbols carved into the beams. The air smelled of incense and something sweeter, something I didn't recognize back then. blood and honey. They prayed at sunrise and burned offerings at dusk. Animals mostly. Birds. Sometimes deer. I asked questions. They called me Brother Michael. They gave me white robes and a room of my own. I pretended to believe. At first. But something inside that place bent reality. The longer I stayed, the harder it became to remember why I came. And then came the night of fire. It started with music. Low humming. Then chants, growing louder, more desperate. I snuck out of my cabin and followed the sound to the chapel. The doors were wide open. Everyone stood inside in rows, arms raised. Alfonso stood at the altar, drenched in red robes, his eyes wide with something far beyond joy. He held up a dagger and shouted, "Tonight we cross." That was when the screaming began. They set themselves on fire. One by one. No hesitation. No fear. The flames lit the night like a sunrise made of madness. I remember the heat on my face. The stench. Skin cracking. The sound of bones snapping under pressure. I ran. I don't remember how I got out. Only that I woke up 2 days later in a hospital bed, bandaged and broken, whispering Alfonso's name over and over until the nurse sedated me. They said it was a mass suicide. That I was lucky to be alive. They never found Alfonso's body. Lucky. What a cursed word. Today, I went back to the chapel ruins. I hadn't been there since the fire. The trail was overgrown, nature swallowing what the cult left behind. The burned-out shell of the chapel stood like a blackened skeleton against the sky. Charred beams reached out like hands trying to grab something they could never hold. I stepped inside. The floor creaked under my boots. The air was thick with ash, even after all these years. In the center of the room, where the altar once stood, someone had placed fresh candles. They were unlit, but new. Not from 1997. Someone had been here. Recently. A coldness slipped down my spine. I turned in a slow circle, eyes scanning every corner, every shadow. Nothing. But the silence, it was watching me. On the wall behind where the altar had been, I saw it. A symbol. Drawn in charcoal, sharp and jagged, like it had been carved from memory. The same symbol from my dream. The same one Alfonso drew in the air, with smoke the night of the fire. My throat tightened. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over broken wood. My heart pounded like it wanted to break out of my chest. I don't remember leaving. I only remember slamming my cabin door shut and locking it. Now, as I sit here writing this, I can still feel the ash in my lungs. Someone is trying to finish what Alfonso started. And I'm starting to think he never really died. I was elbow deep in the rusted guts of a '92 Ford Bronco when I heard the bell above the garage door jingle. No one ever came here without a reason. It was too far out of town, and most folks in Black Hollow had learned to keep their distance from me. They called me the survivor when they thought I couldn't hear. Like it was some badge I wore instead of a wound. I wiped my hands on a rag and turned around. She was young, maybe 19, wearing a black hoodie with the sleeves cut off and a skull and roses patch stitched on the chest. Her eyes flicked around the place like she was half expecting something to crawl out of the walls. I knew the look. She wasn't scared of me. She was scared of something else. "You Mike Granger?" she asked, stepping inside. "Who's asking?" "Jenny. Jenny Clark. I live up off Bitter Pine Road." I nodded, half interested. "You need your car fixed?" "No. I need answers." She stepped closer, pulling something from her pocket. "And I think you're the only one who might have M." She held out a small plastic cassette. Old, worn, with the label half faded. But I could just barely make out what was written in red ink. Ascension Tape 7. My stomach tightened. "Where did you get this?" I asked, not touching it. "Found it in the attic of the old Johnson place. My friends and I were exploring. Thought it was just junk until we played it." Her voice lowered. "It said your name. On the tape. Over and over." I finally took it from her hand. The plastic was warm. Too warm. "You're messing with things you don't understand, Jenny. That's what they all say before something happens." She looked at me dead serious. "And something is happening. People are hearing things. Seeing things. Someone's been drawing those cult symbols on mailboxes. And 2 hikers went missing last week up by Devil's Ridge. The sheriff's calling it a bear attack. But I heard the recordings. This is not a bear thing." She had that look I'd seen too many times. The look of someone standing too close to a fire and still leaning in. "I don't want to remember any of it," I said. "But it remembers you," she whispered. I stared at the tape. I hadn't heard the name Ascension since the massacre. Alfonso had called the ritual the Great Ascension. Said it would burn away our flesh and leave only our light behind. There were rumors about tapes, recordings of rituals, sermons, prophecies. Most were destroyed in the fire. But now one had come back. Jenny leaned against the workbench. I have an old player in my car if you want to hear it. I wanted to say no. I wanted to tell her to leave, throw the tape into the furnace, and pretend none of this ever happened. But instead, I followed her outside. Her car was a beat-up hatchback, stuffed with camera gear, maps, and books on cults and dream interpretation. She popped in the tape and turned the volume up. At first, it was just static, crackling, faint. Then a voice. "My children," the voice said. Smooth, warm, hypnotic. "Do not be afraid. The fire only frees you." Alfonso. I felt the hair on my arms rise. The last witness walks among the ash. You must bring him home. You must bring him. Mike. I flinched. Jenny froze. Did it say your name again? I nodded slowly. There was a pause on the tape. Then a high-pitched hum that pierced straight through my skull, like nails on a chalkboard made of bone. Jenny yanked the cassette out and threw it on the passenger seat. "That's enough," she said, her voice shaky. But the hum kept ringing in my ears, even though the tape was out. I clutched my head, trying to shake it loose, but it was like it had burrowed in. Then came the whisper. Not from the speakers. From the woods behind the garage. "Mike!" Jenny heard it too. She turned slowly, her face pale. "Tell me you have a dog," she whispered. I didn't. We both looked toward the trees. The pines stood silent, but the shadows between them felt thicker, like something was waiting. That night, I didn't sleep. I kept the tape in a metal box, locked tight under my bed. But I could still hear it. Not with my ears. With my soul. Something had been woken. Something that never really died. And it was whispering again. It wanted me to remember. It wanted me to come back. I didn't sleep the night Jenny gave me that tape. I stayed up staring at it, just a plain black cassette with a peeling red sticker on one side. Written in shaky handwriting, Ascension Tape 7. The word Ascension felt like a punch in the gut. That was what they called it back then. Not a massacre. Not mass suicide. Just Ascension. I held the tape in my hand for hours, too afraid to play it, too terrified to throw it away. By sunrise, I was sitting on the porch with a mug of cold coffee and a cigarette that had burned down to my fingers. The fog rolled low over the woods. Black Hollow always looked like it was holding its breath. I hadn't spoken to anyone besides Jenny in almost a week. And even then, it wasn't by choice. She came back that afternoon, knocking twice on the side door of the garage, her red hoodie pulled tight over her head like she was hiding from the sky. "You listened to it?" she asked. I shook my head. "Not yet." "Good," she said, voice flat. "You shouldn't have it at all. Then why give it to me?" She hesitated, then looked around like someone might be watching. "I need to show you something," she said. Out near the forest line. We walked in silence, crunching through dead leaves and brittle pine needles. The trees looked skeletal this time of year, tall and twisted, like they were leaning in to hear our footsteps. Jenny led me about a mile into the woods, past the boundary where the town used to place warning signs, long since torn down or swallowed by bark. We stopped in a clearing. There was a circle burned into the ground, just wide enough for a grown man to lie in. Black ash, bones, and something worse. In the center of the circle was a dead deer. Not torn up by wolves or hit by a truck. This one had been placed, laid out like it was sleeping, hooves tucked neatly beneath it. But its throat was slit, and there was a symbol carved into its ribcage. The same one I'd seen in my dreams. "Jesus," I muttered, stumbling back. Jenny lit a cigarette with shaking fingers. "That's the third one this month." I stared at the symbol, my stomach turning. "This is recent?" "Yesterday probably. Fresh blood." She kicked a small recorder out from under the deer's body. It was old, one of those handheld cassette types. "Play it." I picked it up slowly, dreading what I'd hear. The static came first, hissing and crackling like dry leaves. Then whispers. A voice, his voice. "Mike!" I froze. Jenny looked at me. "You heard it, right?" The voice was faint, like it was coming from far underwater. But it was unmistakable. "Alfonso." "Impossible," I whispered. "He's dead. He burned in that fire." Jenny stared at me, eyes full of something I couldn't name. Maybe part of him did, but not all. Back at my place, I finally played the Ascension tape. The sound started low, chanting. A chorus of voices, each one humming in perfect, sick harmony. Then the tempo changed. Screaming. Not of pain, of joy. Like they were celebrating something horrible. A man began to speak. I hadn't heard that voice in over 10 years, but I'd never forgotten it. "My children," Alfonso said, "do not weep for this flesh. The flesh is a mask. We discard it, and we rise." I slammed the tape out of the deck. The silence after was louder than the noise. I stood there, shaking, hands gripping the counter. Then I saw it. On the mirror across the room. A smudge. No, a handprint. Burnt black and streaked like ash. Not mine. Not Jenny's. It was the size of a child's hand. I turned to ask her if she saw it, but she was gone. That night, the woods didn't whisper. They screamed. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I didn't want to, but because I couldn't. The second I closed my eyes, I saw him again. Alfonso. Standing in the center of the chapel, arms outstretched, face hidden behind that cracked porcelain mask, whispering words in a language that made my teeth ache. His voice echoed like it was underwater, heavy, slow, wrong. So I stayed awake, drank bitter coffee, let my eyes sting while the wind howled outside. I told myself I was losing it, that maybe I was just digging too deep into old memories. Trauma plays tricks on the mind. I knew that. I wrote about that. But the things I saw, they weren't memories. They were warnings. Around noon, I forced myself to get out. I needed air, or answers, maybe both. So I drove to the edge of town. There was a man I hadn't seen in years. Someone who'd lived through it too. If anyone would understand, it was him. His name was Pastor Clark. He used to preach at a small church on the east side of Black Hollow, before the crimson light swallowed the town in its red hunger. He wasn't part of the cult, but he knew them. Tried to warn people back then. No one listened. After the fire, he disappeared. Rumor was he went mad. The address I had was a broken-down trailer parked behind an abandoned gas station. I knocked twice. Nothing. Then a third time. Still nothing. Just as I turned to leave, the door creaked open. He stood there, barefoot, beard down to his chest, eyes like two cloudy marbles. He didn't say anything for a while. Just stared at me. I think he recognized me, but he wasn't sure if I was real. Maybe I wasn't. "Clark," I said. "It's me. Mike Granger." He blinked. Slowly. Then his voice came out like sandpaper. "I know what you brought with you." That stopped me cold. "What do you mean?" "You were supposed to die with the rest of them," he whispered. "But you didn't. And now he's inside you." I felt ice crawl down my spine. "Who's he?" Clark turned his head, like he was listening to something far away. Then he stepped aside. "Come in. But don't sit. He doesn't like that." Inside, the place smelled like smoke and salt. Candles lined the shelves, some burned down to nubs. Strange drawings were taped to the walls, symbols I recognized from the cult's records. Circles with thorns, eyes with no pupils. One, right above the door, was painted in what looked like dried blood. Clark shuffled to the far corner and picked up a journal, pages yellowed and curled. He handed it to me like it was a ticking bomb. I kept records. After the fire. After the dreams started. I flipped through it. Dozens of pages. All filled with the same phrase over and over. The red veil is thin. The red veil is thin. The red veil is thin. What is the red veil? I asked, my voice barely steady. Clark looked at me, and for a moment, there was clarity in his eyes. It's the layer between this world and theirs. Alfonso didn't want heaven or hell. He wanted the place in between. The bleeding place. He moved closer, lowered his voice. That night, the massacre, it wasn't an ending. It was a doorway. He marked you. You're the last witness. The anchor. The room swayed. My hands trembled. I remembered the dreams, the altar, the chanting, the blood. And if I am? I asked. What happens next? Clark looked away. Then the veil breaks. And he steps through. Suddenly, the radio in the corner hissed to life, static and a low, crawling hum. Clark didn't flinch. He just closed his eyes. He's listening, he whispered. I backed away, heart hammering. I had to get out. I shoved the journal into my coat and made for the door. Mike, Clark called behind me. I paused. Don't sleep tonight. Whatever you do, don't fall asleep. I drove home faster than I should have. My knuckles were white around the steering wheel. I didn't turn on the radio. Didn't look in the mirrors. When I finally made it back to my cabin, I locked every door and window. Then I opened the journal again, flipping to a page marked with a dried leaf. There, in shaky handwriting, was a drawing of a man in flames, and below it, a message. The prophet burns, but his voice does not die. He waits in the dream. He waits for the anchor. I didn't want to believe it. I really didn't. But when I looked in the mirror, there were bruises on my shoulders. Fingerprints. I hadn't seen anyone. I hadn't fallen. I hadn't dreamed. Or maybe I had. And maybe Alfonso had touched me again. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed, staring at the cracked ceiling, listening to the wind drag its cold fingers across the cabin walls. My body begged for rest, but every time I closed my eyes, I felt his voice pressing against the edges of my mind. Not a scream, not a whisper, just there, like a breath on the back of my neck. By morning, my hands were shaking. I drowned 2 mugs of black coffee, grabbed my coat, and drove into town. The roads were empty. No kids riding bikes, no old men gossiping outside the diner, not even the stray dogs that used to skulk around the junkyard. It felt like the whole town had taken a step back, hiding behind curtains and locked doors. At the edge of town, I found the trail that led toward the old Crimson Light Chapel. I shouldn't have gone back there. Every part of me knew that. But Jenny was gone. Disappeared like smoke. Her phone went straight to voicemail. Her house was empty, lights off, mailbox stuffed with days-old flyers. She left me a note before she vanished. Just 4 words, written on the back of a cassette case. He's almost through, Mike. The trees leaned in as I walked the trail. It felt tighter than before, like the forest itself was breathing. Shadows shifted. Every creak of a branch sounded like a footstep behind me. I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see Alfonso's white robes drifting between the trees. But there was nothing, only the rustle of dead leaves and the wind moaning through the pines. When I reached the chapel, I almost turned back. The front door, once chained and padlocked shut, now hung open. It groaned slowly, moving with the wind, like it was inviting me in. I stepped over the threshold. The inside smelled like wet stone and rot. The air was colder here, like the chapel had been pulled slightly out of sync with the world. Dust coated the pews. The altar was shattered, broken wood scattered across the floor. Burn marks still licked up the walls, black scars from the fire all those years ago. But something had changed. Someone or something had been here recently. There were fresh footprints in the ash. Small, narrow ones. A girl's. Jenny's, maybe. They led down the aisle, past the pulpit, and stopped at the trapdoor near the altar. The one that led into the crypt. I stood above it, heart pounding. The metal ring on the door was smeared with something dark and crusted. Blood, maybe. Or worse. I hesitated. Then I pulled it open. The smell hit me like a punch. Old death. Damp stone. Sulfur. I clicked on my flashlight and climbed down the wooden ladder, one shaky step at a time. The air grew heavier the deeper I went, pressing against my chest like wet cloth. The crypt hadn't changed. Same stone walls, same flickering candles in rusted holders, somehow still burning after all these years. But something was different. In the center of the room, someone had drawn the red veil symbol, an eye with a jagged slit through the center, using what looked like ash and dried blood. Around it were old bones arranged in circles. Animal, maybe human. I didn't want to know. And in the center of the eye, placed carefully like an offering, was Jenny's notebook. I picked it up. The cover was soaked through, pages stuck together. But I peeled it open and found her last entry. He's not dead. Not fully. He's in the space between dreams. And he's using me to find you. My flashlight flickered. The air dropped 10 degrees in an instant. And then I heard it. Not a sound. A voice. Right behind me. Michael. I spun, heart hammering. No one there. Only the candles, and one of them had just gone out. I backed toward the ladder, Jenny's notebook clutched in my hands, my breath fogging in front of me. The silence grew thick. The walls seemed to breathe. Then the other candles snuffed out, one by one, until I was standing in total darkness. And in the blackness, he spoke again. You opened the door. Now watch what comes through. I didn't climb the ladder. I ran up it, stumbled into daylight, fell onto the chapel floor, gasping like I had just escaped drowning. The door slammed shut behind me. I didn't look back. By nightfall, I was back in the cabin, notebook spread on the kitchen table, hands still trembling. I flipped through every page. Symbols, rituals, sketches of the chapel, and then a name I hadn't seen in decades. The Last Witness. Beneath it, scribbled in shaky ink. It's you, Mike. He saved you for the end. And that's when I realized this wasn't about guilt anymore. It was about prophecy. And I was at the center of it. I woke up gasping. My sheets were soaked with sweat, and my chest felt tight, like something heavy had been sitting on it all night. The morning light barely reached my bedroom window, casting long, pale stripes across the floor. I sat up slowly, rubbing the sting from my eyes, and noticed something was wrong. There was dirt on my hands. Not the kind you get from working under a car. This was fine, dark soil, wet, smelling like the forest. My fingernails were caked with it, and my palms itched like they'd been scraped across something rough. I stood up on shaky legs and stumbled into the bathroom. That's when I saw them. 2 identical symbols, one on each palm. A twisted circle of jagged lines. The mark of the crimson light. I stared at them, heart pounding, trying to understand. I hadn't drawn them. They were burned in, faint but real, like they'd been pressed into my flesh with red-hot wire. I turned on the faucet, tried to wash it off. Scrubbed until my skin went raw. But the marks stayed. And that's when I heard it again. The voice. Faint, like it was echoing through a tunnel. You survived because you were chosen. I stumbled backward, hit the sink, and nearly dropped to the floor. I wasn't alone. Not anymore. I didn't want to sleep again, but my body betrayed me. Hours later, after pacing and drinking black coffee until my stomach twisted in knots, my eyes gave in. And I found myself there. Back in the chapel. Back in the nightmare. Only this time it was different. The walls were intact. The fire hadn't started yet. The ceiling loomed high above, covered in hanging bones that swayed like wind chimes. Candles lined the altar, and the scent of burning sage, or maybe something fouler, filled the air. People stood shoulder to shoulder, all dressed in crimson robes, chanting. Their eyes were empty, their voices dry and cracked. And I wasn't me. I was him. I could feel it, my arms lifted into the air, my mouth moving with the chant, my heart beating steady cold. I looked down and saw Alfonso Creed's hands. Old, weathered, calloused from years of twisted rituals. And he began to speak. Brothers, sisters, the hour is here. The veil is thin. Tonight, we become more. I tried to scream, to take back control of my body, but I was locked inside, a prisoner watching through Alfonso's eyes. The chanting grew louder. One by one, the followers began to walk into the fire pit at the center of the room, eyes wide, faces blank. Their bodies twisted as the flames licked their robes. No one screamed. No one ran. They just burned. And Alfonso, I kept smiling. We are not dying, I whispered with a voice not mine. We are crossing. I jolted awake, gasping. It was night again. But I wasn't in bed. I was outside, lying on the forest floor, right at the edge of the old chapel ruins. My hands were trembling. My shirt was torn, and the scent of smoke clung to my skin. I looked around, disoriented. No sign of anyone. No fire. Just silence. Until I heard a crunch of leaves. I turned fast. And saw him. Alfonso. Standing in the tree-line, just beyond the reach of moonlight. His face was exactly as I remembered from years ago, but wrong. Too smooth, like stretched leather. His eyes glowed a deep red. He raised a hand slowly. Pointed to me. Then to the chapel. Then vanished. I didn't go home that night. I sat there until sunrise, too afraid to move, afraid that if I stood up, the ground itself would swallow me. I know now the dreams aren't just memories. They're invitations. And I've already RSVP'd. I parked my truck just beyond the rusted gate, the same place I had so many years ago when the flames first lit up the night sky. The woods around the chapel were too quiet. No birds. No wind. Just that heavy silence that made your ears ring. In my hand, I held the cassette, Ascension Tape 7. It felt warm. Almost like it was pulsing with a heartbeat of its own. I didn't understand why I was doing this. Maybe I wanted to find Jenny. Maybe I wanted to end it. Or maybe I just wanted to face him. I stepped through the gate. The grass was dead, the air sharp with the smell of ash that should have faded long ago. The chapel's bones still stood, blackened beams stretching into the sky like fingers begging for mercy. I pushed open what was left of the door and stepped inside. It was darker than it should have been. I knelt at the altar, the same one where Alfonso had slit his own throat, grinning as the fire danced in his eyes. I pulled out the old tape recorder Jenny gave me. Its button stuck a little, and the speakers hissed when I pressed play. Static. Then a voice. Alfonso's voice. Let the red veil fall, and we shall see clearly. The chanting started, low and slow like a heartbeat. I could barely breathe. The air grew thick. The temperature dropped. I could see my breath rising into the darkness above me. The floor began to tremble beneath my knees. The walls groaned. I should have run. But I didn't. I took out the ritual notes Jenny had scribbled down before she vanished. She thought this tape could close the door between worlds if reversed. I flipped the tape, pressed the reverse playback. A scream cut through the chapel. It wasn't from the tape. It came from underneath. The floor beneath the altar split open with a crack that echoed like a gunshot. A jagged hole yawned beneath me, wide and black and breathing. I didn't even have time to think. The wind surged from the pit, grabbed me by the chest, and pulled me in. I fell, and fell, and fell. I don't know how long I was falling. There was no light, just that awful howling wind, and the sense that something alive was watching me from every angle. And then suddenly it stopped. I hit ground, but it wasn't Earth. The world I landed in wasn't ours. The sky above me was a dark red smear, like meat stretched thin. The trees were twisted and pulsing, as if made from veins and bone. The air stank of copper and burning oil. I stood on a path of black stone that shimmered like wet skin. I was in Black Hollow, but not. It was like someone had taken the town and flipped it inside out. Houses bent the wrong way. Windows blinked. Shadows moved even when nothing else did. I saw someone standing at the end of the road. Jenny. She looked pale. Not scared, but distant, like she was underwater. Jenny! I shouted. She turned slowly, her eyes hollow, her mouth slightly open. No sound came out. She raised one hand and pointed behind me. I turned. Alfonso was waiting. But he wasn't a man anymore. He stood taller than before, his body stretched and broken, as if he'd been torn in half and sewn back together with shadows. His face still bore that smug smile, but his eyes bled, long trails of black dripping down his cheeks like tar. "Welcome back, witness," he said, voice echoing in 100 directions at once. I couldn't move. My legs locked. My chest burned. "You left before the fire could cleanse you," he whispered. "But the red veil never forgets. And now the gate is open." The air thickened. My skin itched like something was crawling under it. The world around us began to hum with energy, vibrating like a held breath. I tried to speak, but my voice cracked. "What do you want from me?" His smile widened. "You." He raised a hand, and behind him, the chapel emerged again, this time built from flesh and bone, writhing alive. "You are the last witness, Mike. The one who saw everything but denied the truth. Now you will finish it." And the chapel doors opened with a groan that sounded like a dying scream. Inside, I could see the altar, and on it was my body, eyes wide open, mouth stitched shut, waiting. My knees gave out. Alfonso stepped closer, each footfall sinking into the ground like it was breathing. "You see, Mike," he said gently, "you never survived the massacre." And with that, the red veil fell. I woke in a place that wasn't real, yet felt more alive than the world I knew. The sky above me bled a deep, pulsing red, like the horizon was a gaping wound. Everything was covered in fog, thick and wet like it had weight. The trees were black, twisted, and leafless, reaching toward the sky like fingers trying to escape the earth. There was no wind, no birds, no sound at all, just the dull hum, like a distant heartbeat. I was in Black Hollow, but not the one I remembered. This was its reflection, corrupted and rotting. The buildings were there, but they leaned in strange angles. Windows blinked, not shattered. Streets shifted when I wasn't looking. The chapel stood tall at the center, darker than the sky, like it had been cut from the world. I moved slowly, each step echoing like I was walking on hollow bones. My chest burned. My palms still throbbed from the ritual. I remembered the fire, the red light, and being pulled into something that wasn't fully dream or reality. I should have been afraid. But I felt something deeper, like I was being watched from the inside. "Mike!" The voice floated through the fog, soft as breath on glass. I turned. There she was. Jenny. She stood by the chapel steps, barefoot and pale, her eyes wide but strangely calm. Her face was the same, but something in her posture was off, like she wasn't fully herself anymore. "Jenny," I called out. She didn't speak. She turned and walked up the steps. The old wooden doors groaned open behind her without her touching them. I followed. The chapel inside was colder than death. Candles burned without flame. The pews were filled with shadows, sitting still like they were listening to a sermon that never ended. They didn't look at me. They just breathed. I walked the aisle slowly, the floor creaking beneath my feet. The altar was still there, but it had changed. Now it pulsed, like a heart wrapped in barbed wire. Blood ran down its sides, vanishing before it reached the ground. Then he spoke. "Welcome home, witness." I turned around, and there he was. Alfonso Creed. He hadn't aged. His face was smooth, almost too smooth, like it had been stretched over bone. His eyes were hollow, glowing faintly red from within. He wore his old robes, torn and soaked in dried blood. Around his head, a crown of twisted thorns and jawbones. "You're not real," I whispered. "Oh, but I am," he said, stepping forward. "More real than I've ever been." My body tensed. Every part of me wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't listen. It was like the air itself was holding me down. "You crossed the veil," he said. "You opened the gate with blood and breath. And now here we are, together again." I clenched my fists. "You murdered your followers. Burned them alive for some sick ritual." "They ascended," he said with a smile. "They were the flame. You were the wick. And now the final fire waits. I'm not helping you, but you already did." He raised one hand, and I saw Jenny fall to her knees behind the altar. Chains wrapped around her wrists, binding her to the pulsing stone. "No," I stepped forward. He flicked his fingers, and I was thrown back into the pews, landing hard against something that moaned. The shadows stirred but didn't move. They were watching, waiting. "She's not the sacrifice," Alfonso said. "You are. The last witness. You survived the massacre. That made you the anchor. The bridge." I pulled myself up, chest heaving. The air was thick with rot and smoke. My mind screamed at me to wake up. But I wasn't asleep. Not anymore. Alfonso walked toward me, his feet leaving no sound. "I've been inside you, Mike," he whispered. "For years. You carried me in your dreams like a coffin carries the dead." I reached into my jacket pocket. My fingers found the lighter. The same one I used at the ruins. "I didn't come here to die," I said. He tilted his head. "Then why did you light the fire?" My thumb struck the flint. The flame flared to life. "For them." I threw it. The flame hit the altar, and everything screamed. The chapel howled like a wounded beast. The shadows burst into smoke. The walls cracked and bled. Alfonso shrieked, his voice no longer human. His skin peeled, revealing something underneath, black, writhing, inhuman. He lunged. I ran to Jenny, yanked the chains loose, and pulled her toward the door. The world collapsed around us. Blood poured from the ceiling. The floor opened in jagged cracks. "Mike," she shouted. "You have to wake up." "I don't know how." She grabbed my hand. "Then remember who you are." I closed my eyes, blocking out the screams, the heat, the stench of rot and burning dreams. I remembered the night of the massacre. I remembered the ones who didn't make it. I remembered why I came back. And then, silence. Just silence. I don't know how long I'd been falling. It felt like hours, maybe days. There was no sky, just a heavy, endless red that swallowed everything. I crashed into the ground hard, but it didn't hurt. It felt like landing in wet ash. The air was thick with smoke and something sweeter, like burning incense and rot. My ears rang with whispers, like hundreds of mouths speaking just beneath the surface of my mind. I stood up slowly. All around me was a warped version of Black Hollow. The trees were taller, blackened and bent like they were bowing to something. The dirt path that led to the old chapel in real life was now paved in bones. Actual bones. Skulls, ribs, spines, stacked neatly like cobblestones. I didn't want to walk it, but I knew I had to. Each step I took sank into the path with a soft crunch. I kept my eyes forward, though I felt the trees watching me. They breathed, I swear. With every gust of wind, their twisted branches creaked like they were whispering my name. Then I saw it. The chapel. It stood just as it had the night of the massacre, only worse. Its wooden walls dripped with a thick, red ooze. The stained glass windows glowed, but not with sunlight. Inside them danced things with too many eyes and mouths that stretched wide with hunger. The bell tower was crooked, and the bell itself swayed back and forth even though there was no breeze. The doors were open, waiting. I stepped inside. The air changed instantly. Heavier, colder. The pews were full, but not with people. Figures sat motionless, wrapped in old robes. Their faces were hidden, but I could hear them breathing. Shallow, eager. At the front of the chapel stood the altar. And behind it, Alfonso. He hadn't aged. He looked just as he had that night. White robes, red sash, long dark hair, and eyes that burned with a kind of joy I can only describe as evil. But now, he wasn't just a man. His skin pulsed beneath the robes like something was moving underneath. His shadow flickered independently of the light. Horns curled just beneath the surface of his scalp, threatening to break through. "Welcome home, Mike," he said, smiling like an old friend. "This isn't home," I said, my voice shaking. He spread his arms. "It is. You've carried me with you for years. Through every nightmare. Every whisper. You made me real." I looked down. My hands were bleeding again. The symbols, the same ones from the massacre night, burned red on my palms. "You're the witness," Alfonso said, stepping closer. "You saw the fire. You survived it. You remember every scream, every soul that burned. That memory anchors this place to your world. No, I backed away. I didn't ask for this. But you never let it go. He pointed a long, bony finger at my chest. You came back. You listened to the tape. You opened the door. You lit the flame, Mike. I pulled the cassette from my pocket. Then I'll burn it all down. Alfonso tilted his head, curious. I grabbed the altar cloth, yanked it aside, and poured gasoline from the can I'd brought. In this dream, it felt real. Everything did. I struck a match. But before I could drop it, Alfonso moved. Faster than anything human. He was in front of me, one hand around my neck, lifting me off the ground. His skin was cold and wet. His eyes bled down his cheeks. You can't kill what lives in memory, he hissed. I kicked and struggled, gasping. Then I remembered something, the survivor, the one in the asylum. He told me names hold power. The cult called Alfonso Prophet. They never used their real names. Maybe that was the key. So I spoke. Your name is Alfonso Creed, I choked out. Not Prophet. Not Vessel. Just a man. He froze. I repeated it louder. Alfonso Creed. Born in 1949 in Nevada. Your mother died in childbirth. You were beaten. Alone. You built this cult because no one else believed in you. He screamed. The chapel shook. The robed figures began to twitch. Crack. Melt. You are not a god. I shouted. You're a coward hiding behind fear. I dropped the match. The flames exploded up the altar, catching the tapes, the cloth, the pulsing wood beneath our feet. Alfonso screamed again, but this time it wasn't power, it was pain. He dropped me. I crawled away as the fire spread. The walls groaned, melting into black tar. The robed figures burst into ash, one by one, until only Alfonso remained, writhing in fire, half man, half thing. You haven't ended it, he howled. You are the door, Mike. As long as you remember. The roof collapsed. Everything went red. Then black. And for the first time in years, silence. I came to in the dirt. My body was half buried beneath a thin layer of ash, my fingers twitching against roots and pebbles, lungs burning for air thick with smoke. I didn't know how long I'd been out. The sky above me was the color of old paper, gray, torn, and trembling. I blinked, coughing, tasting soot on my tongue. The forest around me was silent. Too silent. No birds. No wind. Just the sharp crackle of burnt wood settling. I pulled myself upright, every muscle aching like I'd been torn apart and stitched back together wrong. My hands were blistered and shaking. I looked down and saw the symbol. Alfonso's twisted mark was gone. My palms were clean, except for blood crusted along my nails and lines of soot in every crease. I stood slowly, wobbling like a newborn deer. The place around me, it wasn't the crypt anymore. It wasn't the dream realm soaked in red fog. It was the real world. The real Black Hollow, or what was left of it. The chapel ruins were burning. Not with roaring flames, but with glowing embers. Smoke drifted lazily upward from what used to be stone and wood, now melted into bone-colored slag. The ground had split open near the back wall, as if something huge had clawed its way out and left behind a scar. But there was no sign of anyone. No bodies. No Jenny. I called out her name. Once. Twice. Only the echo answered me. I limped toward the edge of the clearing, hoping, no begging, to see her stumble out of the trees, dirty and alive. But nothing came. Just ash swirling in the wind like ghost skin. Eventually, the world started moving again. Sirens in the distance. Flashing lights through the trees. Locals. Firemen. Police. They found me standing on the road, covered in smoke, eyes blank. One of them wrapped a blanket around my shoulders and tried asking questions. I don't remember what I said. I think I just kept muttering. He's gone, he's gone, he's finally gone. They said it was another wildfire. Maybe lightning. Maybe arson. No mention of rituals. No sign of Jenny. Just me, the last man standing again. Later, when I was sitting on the back of an ambulance, sipping warm water with shaking hands, I caught my reflection in the metal door. For a moment, I thought I saw him, Alfonso, standing behind me. Watching. Smiling. But when I blinked, he was gone. They let me go after a few hours. No charges. No further questions. I returned to my cabin the next day. Everything was how I left it. Except one thing. The cassette player I'd used to listen to the Ascension tapes, it was melted. Twisted like something had gripped it in a burning hand and crushed it from the inside. I didn't touch it. I didn't sleep for a few nights after that. I just sat on the edge of my bed, lights on, eyes on the door. Waiting. waiting to hear him whisper again. But the dreams, they stopped. For the first time in years, I slept without seeing fire, without hearing screams. No more visions of the red veil. No more of Alfonso's sermons in my ears. Just quiet, empty sleep. I thought I had burned him. I thought setting fire to that crimson dreamscape, hearing Alfonso's scream as the flames swallowed him, meant it was over. I woke up coughing soot, half buried under blackened pine needles, alone in the woods. The sheriff said there was another unexplained fire near the old compound, but they found no bodies. Not even mine. They looked at me like I was cursed. Maybe I am. I left Black Hollow the next day, packed a single duffel, and didn't tell anyone where I was going. I found a quiet apartment 3 towns over. The kind of place with peeling wallpaper and a landlord who doesn't ask questions. It's quiet here. I keep the curtains closed. I don't answer the phone. For a while, the dreams stopped. At first, I didn't trust the silence. Every time I closed my eyes, I braced for the chanting, the burning chapel, the hiss of Alfonso's voice slithering into my skull. But there was nothing. Just darkness. Quiet, empty darkness. It felt like a gift. Days turned into weeks. I started fixing things again. Small appliances, radios, junk that locals brought me in exchange for cash or food. I didn't speak much. I didn't need to. I was rebuilding something inside myself, brick by brick. I even laughed once, watching an old cartoon on a static-filled TV. I told myself I won. Then last night, something changed. The dream started differently. I was standing in the woods, the moon was gone, but everything was glowing red. Not fire, just a soft, eerie glow coming from the trees themselves. I could hear a slow, distant drumbeat, like a heartbeat, far underground. I looked down and saw footprints in the soil. Bare, human prints. They weren't mine. They led to a wooden door, standing upright in the middle of the forest, with nothing holding it up. It was the same door Alfonso showed me in the dreams. The one he called the crossing. I didn't move. I didn't open it. But the handle turned by itself, and a gust of heat rolled over me, thick with ash and copper. Then I heard it, his voice, whispering. "We crossed once, Mike. We'll do it again." I woke up gasping. The room was cold. My bedsheets were twisted around me like restraints. I sat up, trembling, sweat running down my back. And that's when I saw it. On the ceiling above my bed. A symbol. Drawn in something dark and wet. It hadn't been there before. The mark of the red veil. 3 intersecting lines. One curved like a crescent, one jagged like lightning, and one straight down the middle, bleeding into the others. The smell hit me next, raw iron. Blood. I stared at it for what felt like an hour. I didn't move. I didn't scream. I didn't even blink. Because I knew what it meant. He isn't gone. Not really. Not completely. Alfonso didn't just survive in my dreams. He planted something inside me. A seed. And now it's waking up. So I'm writing this down. Not as a warning. Not even as a confession. Just a record. In case I don't make it through the next one. Because tonight, I know he'll be waiting. Behind the door. Smiling. And this time, he'll be closer.